I found the keychain under the marble bench, its golden surface scratched by years of careless hands. At first, I thought it was just another trinket left behind by the wealthy guests of the Aurora Financial Gala. But when the light from the crystal chandelier struck it, I saw the monogrammed two entwined letters, V and H, carved with precision. The initials were not mine, not anyone I knew, yet the shape of those letters rattled something deep inside me, as if I had seen them before in a forgotten dream. I slipped it into my pocket quickly, before any of the tuxedoed men or diamond-draped women could notice. I wasn't meant to be there as a guest. My role was to polish the mirrored walls, replace the empty glasses, and make sure the champagne stains on the white marble floor disappeared before anyone tripped on them. But in that moment, I felt as though I had stumbled upon a secret not meant for me, or perhaps meant only for me. The ballroom glittered with the excess of Madrid's financial elite. Men laughed loudly about mergers that would destroy families they had never met. Women whispered sharp words about inheritances, the way they might discuss fabric swatches. I kept my head down, my gloves damp with bleach, the faint smell of disinfectant clinging to me more stubbornly than perfume ever could. Who let her stand there? A woman's voice sliced through the music, high and cold. I turned my head slowly, cloth still in my hand. A tall figure in emerald satin was glaring at me from across the hall. Her lips curled into a disdainful smile. She's staring at the portraits as if they were her family. The guests laughed soft, poisonous laughter that rippled through the crowd. I forced my eyes away from the grand oil paintings, though the face of one man on the canvas had struck me with disturbing familiarity. His angular jaw, his piercing eyes, even the small scar near his chin. I had seen them in the cracked photo frame hidden in the drawer of my rented room. A photo my mother left me, the only image of the man she never named. I bent down, pretending to scrub a perfectly clean spot on the floor, my heart racing. The keychain burned against my thigh through the pocket of my uniform. Later, when the guests moved toward the stage for the chairman's speech, I slipped into the side corridor. My cleaning cart squeaked against the polished tiles, echoing far louder than I wished. There, pinned to the bulletin board reserved for staff schedules, I saw something new. A sheet of payroll envelopes mistakenly left open. My eyes froze on one. The surname on it was Velasco, but the first name typed, it was mine. Not the surname I had carried all my life, the one belonging to my mother's modest lineage. My name, printed with their surname, as if I had already been claimed. I trembled. Two fragments, the keychain and the payroll slip, were pulling me toward a truth I had never dared to voice. The Velasco family controlled one of the largest financial empires in Spain, spreading their wealth through banks, logistics companies, and speculative real estate. I had grown up hearing their name like a storm you couldn't avoid. And now, by some cruel joke, that name was whispering back at me from official paper. I remembered my mother's warning, whispered to me years ago before she passed. Some stains will never wash away, no matter how hard you scrub. And some names are like bleach. They erase everything. At the time, I thought she spoke of poverty, of shame. Tonight, I began to suspect she had spoken of blood. I returned to the ballroom just as the chairman took the stage. Don Hector Velasco's silver hair, commanding presence, voice heavy with authority. He raised his glass. To the future of Velasco Holdings, he declared. Crystal glasses clinked in unison. My hands clenched. I heard his name echo through the hall and felt it strike the hollows of my chest like an accusation. The faces in the crowd blurred, but one woman's gaze remained fixed on me, the same emerald-draped lady who mocked me earlier. Her eyes were sharp, dissecting, as if she saw through my skin into whatever truth I tried to bury. I fled before the gala ended, dragging my cart into the shadows. When I reached my apartment in the outskirts of the city, I locked the door and spread the evidence across my worn kitchen table. The keychain, the payroll slip, and the faded photo my mother had left. The resemblance was undeniable. My hands shook as I tried to clean the table, the cloth tracing circles that grew wetter and wetter, though the surface was already spotless. For days, I carried the secret like a heavy mop bucket sloshing with dirty water. I continued to work at the Velasco headquarters, polishing mirrors until my reflection blurred, scrubbing the floors until my arms ached. Yet each polished surface reflected not just my body, but a question. Who am I really? It was in the mirrored lobby of the Velasco Tower that the final piece fell into place. While wiping fingerprints from the glass doors, I overheard a conversation between two lawyers. They were arguing about a contested will. Don Hector's late brother, apparently, had left behind a hidden testament that named a different heir. The document had been suppressed, locked away, perhaps even destroyed. But the lawyers whispered of a notarial copy that might still exist. I froze. My cloth dangled in my hand. The bleach smell filled my nose. A suppressed testament, an heir denied. My chest tightened as if invisible gloves pressed against me. Could it be? Me? I didn't dare confront them, not yet. Instead, I searched. Each evening, after scrubbing the marble floors until they shone, I roamed the corridors, gloved hands brushing against file cabinets and forgotten boxes. It was in the storage room, behind a stack of old financial ledgers, that I found a folder sealed with wax. Inside lay brittle papers, a notarial act dated 24 years ago. It bore the signature of a lawyer, long retired, and the name of the child unnamed, only described as female, born to Isabella R., my mother's name. Tears blurred the words. I pressed the paper against my chest, the way I once pressed clean sheets against mattresses, trying to smooth out their wrinkles. But discovery is never silent. Within a week, the emerald-clad woman confronted me. She cornered me in the service corridor, her perfume overwhelming. "You should be careful where you snoop," she hissed. "Velasco blood doesn't mix with mop water." I said nothing. Words would only betray the fire rising in me. 2 days later, I was summoned not to clean, but to attend. The Velascos were hosting a board meeting at the tower, a gathering of executives, lawyers, and family members. For reasons I couldn't fathom, they required staff presence to witness protocol. I was ordered to stand by the mirrored wall, gloves still on my hands. The meeting began with talk of mergers and dividends, but soon voices sharpened. The hidden testament had resurfaced. Someone, perhaps one of the lawyers I overheard, had brought it to light. The family was outraged. Accusations flew across the glossy table. It was then that I stepped forward, hands trembling, and placed my evidence on the table. The photo, the keychain, the payroll slip, the notarial copy. The room fell silent, except for the faint squeak of the chair as Don Hector leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What is this?" he demanded. "My name is Clara," I said, my voice steady, though my knees shook. "I was born to Isabella R., who once worked in your estate. This," I pointed to the document, "names me as the child denied." Gasps rippled around the table. The emerald-clad woman clutched her pearls, her face pale beneath the jewels. "You expect us to believe a cleaner?" Another man scoffed. "Not just a cleaner," I whispered. "Your blood." The words echoed against the mirrored walls. The lawyers examined the notarial act, their fingers tracing the seals. One muttered about authenticity, another about legal weight. Then one lifted his head and said, "This is binding. Unless disproven, the claim stands." The silence was colder than bleach water. I felt my chest rise with something I had never allowed myself to feel in their presence: dignity. Yet I also felt the danger. For power is never surrendered quietly, not in boardrooms, not in ballrooms. And so the confrontation began. The confrontation stretched like a crack spreading across glass, silent at first, and impossible to ignore. Don Hector's voice cut through the silence, slow and deliberate. Blood is not enough. Proof can be forged. Memories can be twisted. Do you have more than this? Collection of trinkets? I forced my breathing steady. Yes. From my bag, I pulled another folded sheet, my mother's letter, written in her careful hand before she died. I had kept it hidden for years, afraid of what it said. Tonight, it was no longer a secret, but a weapon. The letter bore her confession. She had been a maid in the Velasco household, dismissed when her pregnancy became impossible to hide. She wrote of Hector's late brother, Santiago, who had sworn to protect her, but died suddenly in a car crash that raised suspicions. She wrote of a promise to recognize me, a promise broken by silence. The board members leaned closer. One of the lawyers read the letter aloud. Each word struck like a hammer against polished marble. The phrases hung in the air. Our child, denied name, hidden to protect her. The emerald-draped woman rose from her chair, her face flushed. This is an outrage. You dare pollute our name with this charade? I met her eyes. Truth cannot be polluted. It only stains those who try to hide it. Gasps rose from around the table. Some turned away, others whispered furiously. I could smell the faint bleach still clinging to my gloves, and for the first time, it did not feel like shame. It felt like armor. The chairman slammed his palm on the table. Enough! This is a boardroom, not a confessional. His silver hair gleamed under the lights, but for the first time, I saw his hand tremble. The lawyers continued their examination, pulling out notarial records, cross-referencing dates. There is consistency, one said quietly. The handwriting matches. The seals are genuine. And if required, a DNA test can settle what words cannot. The room erupted in protest. But in the mirrored wall behind them, I saw their faces not as they wished to be seen, but as they truly were contorted with fear, greed, denial. The meeting adjourned in chaos, but not before one crucial decision. An emergency press conference would be held the following week. Too many rumors had already leaked. The Velascos needed to control the narrative. I returned to my apartment that night shaken but resolute. I placed the letter beside the other documents on my table, then scrubbed the counter until it gleamed, though no dirt remained. My hands shook with exhaustion, yet I felt strangely cleansed, as if the truth itself were a form of bleach cutting through decades of grime. The days that followed were filled with shadows. Strangers watched me as I left work. My apartment door showed signs of tampering. Once, a bucket of water was deliberately spilled in the corridor where I walked, almost sending me crashing down the stairs. I cleaned the spill myself, refusing to let them see me broken. But not all eyes were hostile. One of the younger Velascos, Andras, approached me quietly after a shift. His voice was low, hesitant. If what you say is true, then you're my cousin. His eyes softened. I don't know if the others will ever accept it, but I believe you deserve to be heard. I said nothing, but I saw in his gaze the first crack of humanity in that fortress of arrogance. The press conference arrived. The Velasco Tower's lobby, all mirrors and marble, was transformed into a stage. Reporters crowded in, cameras flashing. The family sat in rows, their jewels and suits gleaming, while I stood apart, wearing the same uniform I had always worn. My gloves, though freshly washed, still smelled faintly of disinfectant. Don Hector began with his usual authority. There have been rumors, falsehoods spread by those seeking attention. Tonight, we clarify. But the lawyers interrupted, producing the documents I had given them. The notarial act, the payroll slip, my mother's letter, all laid out beneath the lights. A hush fell. One lawyer cleared his throat. In accordance with Spanish inheritance law, and considering the evidence presented, it is our duty to acknowledge the legitimacy of the claim. A DNA test will confirm, but the documentation is irrefutable. The cameras clicked wildly. Reporters shouted questions. The emerald-draped woman tried to stand, but her voice was drowned in the storm. And then, the moment came that silenced even the chaos. A photograph was projected on the mirrored wall, a copy from the sealed folder I had discovered. It showed my mother, young and solemn, standing beside Santiago Velasco, his arm protectively around her. The resemblance between his features and mine was undeniable. The crowd gasped. The flash of cameras became relentless. I stepped forward, my voice steady but low. I have scrubbed these floors until they shone. I have polished these mirrors until they reflected every wrinkle of your pride. Tonight, I am not your servant. I am your blood. For a moment, time froze. The polished marble, the mirrored walls, the smell of bleach, all of it seemed to dissolve into silence. Then, one reporter spoke, his voice sharp. "Will the Velasco family recognize her?" The lawyers exchanged glances. Finally, one said, "By law, recognition is inevitable." The emerald-clad woman collapsed into her chair, her jewels clinking like broken glass. Don Hector sat rigid, his face a mask cracked with disbelief. The press swarmed. Questions filled the air, flashes burned, microphones stretched toward me. But I spoke only once more. Truth cleans what lies cannot. Afterward, I walked alone through the lobby. My reflection followed me in the mirrored walls, not as a cleaner bent under weight, but as a woman standing upright. The gloves on my hands gleamed under the lights, no longer tools of servitude, but symbols of resilience. Yet dignity does not pay rent, nor does it erase decades of silence. In the weeks that followed, legal proceedings began. DNA tests confirmed what documents had already shouted. I was Santiago Velasco's daughter, denied but undeniable. A court ordered the family to recognize my status formally. The newspapers printed my name alongside theirs. Whispers filled the city, the cleaner who became an heir. But the inheritance itself was less than people imagined. The Velascos had already divided much of their fortune, their assets tied in complex webs. What remained to me was modest compared to their empires, yet to me it was a universe. A small house deed in Segovia, a bank account untouched, and most symbolically, my rightful surname. I chose not to live in the Velasco Tower. I did not want its marble floors, its mirrored walls. I kept cleaning, though on my own terms now. I polished the wooden steps of my new house, scrubbed the stone courtyard until the sunlight bounced off it. Each act of cleaning became not an obligation, but a prayer, a way of writing dignity into surfaces. Andres visited sometimes. He would bring books or simply sit and talk. "You don't need to keep scrubbing, you know," he said once. I smiled faintly. Some stains take a lifetime to erase. In the city, the Velascos tried to continue their empire, but their image was tarnished. Reporters never forgot the press conference, the mirrored lobby with their arrogance cracked. Don Hector grew frail, his authority eaten away by whispers. The emerald-draped woman vanished from public life. But I remained, not in their shadow, not in their tower, but in my own light. I hung the keychain with the monogram on the wall of my small house, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. 5 and H, Velasco, and Hector. Symbols of power that once tried to erase me, now powerless to define me. And on the opposite wall, I placed my mother's letter, framed carefully. Her words no longer a secret, but a testament. I breathed deeply. The air no longer smelled of bleach or disinfectant, but of sunlight on stone. Yet sometimes, when I passed a mirror, I would pause. I would see not just myself, but the reflection of all the women who scrubbed floors, polished silver, and carried truths too heavy to speak. I stood for them too. And so the story ended not with vengeance, but with cleansing. Not with destruction, but with transformation. The marble towers of the Velascos might crumble one day, but the dignity reclaimed on that mirrored night would remain, shining like a floor, finally freed of its stains. Months passed, and the weight of the Velasco name settled over me like a cloak that didn't quite fit. At first, every newspaper headline, every whispered conversation in the market, carried my story. The cleaner air. Some said it with admiration, others with mockery, but always with a kind of fascination. For the wealthy, I was a scandal. For the poor, I was proof that even marble walls could crack. I returned to my work because it was the only rhythm I trusted. At dawn, I would scrub my own kitchen tiles, watching the water ripple in the bucket, breathing in the sharp scent of detergent. Cleaning was the language I understood. Surfaces held memories, and the act of scrubbing them was a way to rewrite the past. I wasn't erasing who I was polishing it into clarity. One evening, as the sun burned red over Madrid, I received an envelope. It bore the seal of the National Court. Inside was the final judgment. My paternity formally recognized, my surname amended, my inheritance secured. The words were stark, legal, cold, but they were also irrefutable. The denial that had shadowed my life had been scrubbed away. I read the document again and again until the letters blurred. Then I folded it neatly and placed it beside the framed letter from my mother. Two documents, one of law, one of love, both undeniable. The Velascos, meanwhile, waged their silent war. The board of directors fractured, siblings turned against one another. Their fortune, though vast, had begun to decay like marble left too long without polish. My presence had unsettled their balance, not because of wealth, I had claimed little of it, but because of truth. Andres visited more often. He spoke softly of the tensions inside the family. They don't fear losing money, he said. They fear losing the myth. For decades, the Velascos have lived in mirrors. Now the glass has cracked, and they see themselves as others see them. I listened, hands clasped around a cup of tea, the steam rising like quiet prayers. Mirrors don't lie, I murmured. They only reflect what is already there. He smiled faintly. You sound like Santiago. He used to say things like that. The name stung my father, whom I never knew, whose absence shaped me as much as his blood. I wondered what he might have thought, seeing me now, a cleaner carrying his name into a world that tried to erase me. The invitation came unexpectedly. The National Museum of Madrid was hosting a gala in honor of Santiago Velasco's philanthropic work, a belated recognition arranged by those who once buried his legacy. The family was to attend, and so was I. I hesitated. Returning to a ballroom meant returning to whispers, to eyes that weighed me like an object. Yet Andres insisted. You don't need to stand in the shadows anymore. Come as who you are. The night of the gala, I wore a simple black dress, not jewels, not satin, but fabric I could move in, breathe in. I carried no handbag, only a folded handkerchief that smelled faintly of lavender soap. My reflection in the mirror was plain, but steady. The museum glittered with light. Chandeliers threw prisms across marble floors, and portraits of Spain's elite lined the walls. But in the center stood a new portrait, Santiago Velasco, painted decades ago, his gaze resolute. Guests turned when I entered. Some whispered, some stared openly. The emerald-draped woman was there too, though her once glittering presence seemed faded, like jewelry dulled with time. Don Hector arrived in a wheelchair, his voice weaker, his authority dimmed. The empire he had commanded now trembled on fragile legs. The ceremony began with speeches praising Santiago's vision. Words like honor, legacy, and justice filled the hall. But it was not until the final speaker, a museum curator, unveiled a glass case that the air shifted. Inside lay documents preserved for public view, letters from Santiago, financial records, and one notarized testament. The very testament I had once held in secret. The curator spoke. For years, this testament was obscured. Tonight, it is displayed openly as part of history. It names as heir not only the Velasco estate, but also the child of Isabella R., a child long denied. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. My breath caught. Then the curator turned toward me. That child stands here tonight. All eyes fell on me. I felt my hands tighten around the lavender-scented handkerchief. The silence was heavy, but I did not bend. I stepped forward slowly. "I am Clara Velasco," I said, my voice steady, echoing through the marble hall. "I was born a cleaner's daughter. I worked with bleach on my hands, with mirrors that reflected a face I could not name. Tonight, I carry both names, my mother's courage and my father's truth." For a moment, no one moved. Then, unexpectedly, applause began. Not thunderous, not unanimous, but enough. Some clapped reluctantly, others with genuine conviction. Reporters raised cameras, capturing the moment. The emerald-clad woman's lips tightened. Don Hector lowered his gaze, unable to meet mine. But Andres smiled, pride softening his face. I felt no triumph, only release. The denial had ended not with revenge, but with recognition. The truth had been spoken in public, witnessed, and recorded. Later, as the guests dispersed, I lingered before Santiago's portrait. The painter had captured his scar near the chin, the same one in the photo I had carried since childhood. In his eyes, I saw both distance and closeness, an absence that would never be filled, yet also a presence finally acknowledged. I reached out, my gloved hand brushing the glass that protected the painting. My reflection merged with his in the pane, two faces layered into one. On the museum steps afterward, the night air was cool, the city lights glowing faintly against the sky. Andres joined me. "What now?" he asked. I breathed deeply, the scent of stone and night air, washing away the cloying perfumes of the gala. Now I live. Not as their scandal, not as their secret, just as myself. He nodded, and for the first time, I felt the weight of belonging not to a name, but to a truth. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm I could trust. I continued to clean, not because I had to, but because I chose to. My small house in Segovia became my sanctuary. The floors shone under the sunlight I polished into them. The windows reflected the hills outside, not marble towers. Neighbors came to know me not as the heir, but as Clara, the woman who kept her home spotless, who brewed tea that smelled of lavender, who listened more than she spoke. Sometimes I would open the glass cabinet where I kept the artifacts of my journey, the keychain, the payroll slip, my mother's letter, the notarial act. I would touch them gently, the way one touches scars, not with pain, but with acknowledgement. And I would remember the press conference, the boardroom, the museum gala. Each had been a stage where lies cracked and truth shone through, like light on polished marble. I did not inherit wealth enough to transform the world, but I inherited something else, dignity, a name, and the courage to stand in public without bowing my head. And perhaps that was the truest inheritance of all. When I cleaned now, I did it slowly, almost reverently. The smell of bleach no longer clung to me as shame, but as memory. The gloves I wore were not symbols of servitude, but of resilience. And every polished surface reflected a woman who had scrubbed her way not into riches, but into recognition. One evening, as twilight settled, I stood before the mirror in my hallway. My reflection looked back steadily. Behind me, on the wall, hung the framed letter of my mother and the monogrammed keychain. Together, they told a story of denial and recognition, of silence and truth. I whispered softly, as if speaking to both of them. We are seen now. The house was quiet. The air smelled of lavender and soap. And for the first time, the silence felt whole, not empty. That was the end, not of struggle, but of hiding. The stains had been scrubbed away, the mirrors polished. The truth stood clear, irrefutable, alive.